I always believed a man's voice softened with age. Mine certainly had. Years ago, people jumped when I spoke. Now they barely looked up. That's the strange reward for living long enough. You become quiet, and the world becomes even quieter around you. But my son Daniel, well, he didn't soften toward me. If anything, life hardened him like clay left too long in the sun. The day I moved into his home, temporarily, as he insisted on saying, I noticed something odd before the boxes were even unloaded. Dad, listen carefully. Daniel's voice was clipped, as if we were standing in a courtroom and I'd already said something objectionable. Do not talk to the neighbors. At first, I thought he was joking. His neighborhood didn't look like the sort that needed silent treatment. It was a quiet suburban street. Tidy lawns, pastel mailboxes, the faint smell of laundry detergent drifting from open windows. The kind of street where porch swings creaked and children learned to ride bicycles with training wheels. So I chuckled, brushing it off as a simple boundary-setting moment. But Daniel didn't smile. He leaned in until his breath touched my cheek. I'm serious, Dad. Don't start conversations. Don't wave. Don't even make eye contact if you can help it. I don't want you mixed up in anything. A strange request, and an even stranger tone. His wife Mara stood behind him in the doorway, hands clasped too tightly for comfort. Her knuckles looked pale, almost chalky. She didn't say a word, just kept staring at me with eyes that seemed exhausted. I told myself not to question it yet. After all, I'd only come to recover from a small heart incident. A minor blip, the doctor called it. A gentle warning from the body. I didn't want to create trouble, but trouble tends to arrive without knocking. That afternoon, after the last box was placed in the small guest room, I stood by the window to catch my breath. The neighborhood shimmered warmly under the late sun. A family 2 houses down tossed a frisbee. A woman with a baby stroller walked her dog lazily along the sidewalk. Everything looked pleasant, safe even. So when an older woman across the street waved at me, my hand lifted automatically. 40 years of neighborliness doesn't evaporate just because your son gives you odd instructions. I didn't even get the chance to complete the wave. Daniel appeared at my elbow like a ghost, his hand clenching my wrist before my arm fully rose. Dad, inside, now. His voice was razor sharp. Mara looked down at the rug. The woman across the street lowered her hand as if she'd touched a hot stove. I was just, no, he snapped. We talked about this. Something in his expression made me withdraw. Not fear, not guilt, but recognition. The kind a father learns after raising a child who tries to cover mistakes with louder words. I stepped back from the window. That evening, while unpacking my clothes, I heard whispered voices drifting from the kitchen. Daniel's sharp tone, Mara's trembling replies. I can't keep doing this. They'll say something. They always do. Just need him quiet. Just a little while. If he talks to them, the rest dissolved under the hum of a closing drawer. I sat on the edge of the bed, letting the silence expand around me. When people whisper about you inside your own family's walls, the air turns heavy, like a storm holding its breath. Later, as I brushed my teeth, I saw Daniel passing down the hall with his phone tight in his hand, whispering into it urgently. He didn't notice me. No, they haven't approached him yet. I said I'm handling it. I rinsed my mouth slowly. Handling what? That night, I couldn't sleep. My heart wasn't the problem. It beat steadily, though a bit more aware than usual. No, it was Daniel's warning that echoed through the dark. Don't talk to the neighbors. There's an unsettling thing about forbidden topics. Your mind circles them like a crow, sensing a carcass you can't yet see. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the neighbors who had waved, the woman's startled expression, and how Daniel had reacted as if I were approaching danger, not friendliness. Then, close to midnight, I heard something, a soft sound, not footsteps, not a whisper, crying. I sat up slowly. It wasn't Daniel, it wasn't the kids, it was Mara. I didn't move, I just listened. Because in families, the truth tends to leak in the quietest hours. That was the first night I realized something was wrong in this house, deeply wrong. And whatever it was, the neighbors knew about it. I just didn't know yet that one day they'd be the ones to tell me the truth Daniel fought so hard to hide. On my second morning in Daniel's home, the sun rose soft and forgiving, but the atmosphere inside the house felt tight, stretched thin like fabric pulled too hard. You could almost hear it strain. I walked into the kitchen quietly, not wanting to disturb anyone. Old habits die slower than people think. Elders tiptoe not because they're weak, but because years of living teach you how loud presence can be. Mara was already there, staring into a mug of coffee she wasn't drinking. Her shoulders slumped, her robe loosely tied, eyes shadowed in the way sleepless nights tend to carve out. She startled when she noticed me. "Oh, good morning," she said quickly, brushing hair from her face. She tried to smile, but the smile refused to stay. "Rough night?" I asked gently. Her gaze flicked toward the hallway where Daniel still slept. She swallowed and simply said, "Just tired." That was the first lie of the day. I didn't push her further. Some truths must come out on their own. People resent the ones dragged from them. While making my tea, I peered out the kitchen window, letting my eyes wander over the neat lawns and pastel mailboxes. I'd lived long enough to know a neighborhood's rhythm, the way people walk, the way cars come and go. This place felt too quiet for a community with children and families. Not peaceful quiet, watchful quiet. As I stirred my tea, a movement caught my eye. Mrs. Lander, the neighbor who had waved at me yesterday, stepped out onto her porch. She looked like a woman who'd carried her share of grief. Careful posture, cautious steps, the deep-souled tiredness elders recognize instantly in each other. She saw me through the window and offered the smallest nod. Not a wave, just a nod. A quiet acknowledgement. We both know something's wrong kind of nod. I raised my teacup slightly. Nothing dramatic, just a polite gesture. Before I even had time to sip, Daniel's voice shot down the hall. "Dad!" He entered the kitchen briskly, eyes already narrowed at the window as if it were the source of all problems in his life. What did I say about the neighbors? I kept my voice steady. I didn't speak to anyone. And you nodded back. His voice dropped an octave, anger coiling beneath it. "Dad, you cannot encourage them." Encourage them? I set my cup down slowly, letting the porcelain meet the counter without a sound. There are moments in life where silence speaks louder than shouting. "Daniel," I said calmly, "I don't understand what you're afraid of." He stiffened as if I'd struck a nerve. "I'm not afraid," he snapped. "I just don't want drama. This neighborhood is full of people with nothing better to do than gossip." Behind him, Mara flinched at the word gossip. I saw it. He didn't. He huffed, grabbed his keys, and stormed out for work, muttering under his breath about meddling old men. The door slammed. The house trembled. Mara remained at the table, eyes fixed on her untouched coffee. I sat opposite her, giving her space, yet offering presence. After a long silence, she finally whispered, "He's under a lot of stress. He doesn't mean to be harsh." But her eyes told a different story. They told me his harshness wasn't rare, it was routine. I reached across the table, touching her hand lightly. "I'm not here to judge either of you, but I can see something's weighing on both of you." Her lips parted as if something wanted to spill out, but then, like someone slamming a door inside her mind, she shut it down. "I should get the kids ready," she said abruptly, and she left the kitchen. I finished my tea alone, listening to the house awaken room by room. Doors opening, whispers of hurried children, the clatter of backpacks. Life moving around me, yet strangely apart from me. After the children were off to school and Mara left for errands, I stepped outside. Just a moment of fresh air, I told myself, nothing more. The sky was gentle, the breeze mild. A neighbor pushed a stroller, another trimmed his hedges. Normalcy everywhere. But sometimes normalcy is a disguise. As I stood on the porch, pretending to admire a nearby bird bath, the man from 2 houses down, Mr. Ruiz, paused mid-trim and looked toward me. Our eyes met. His expression held something between concern and warning. He started to walk toward me, hesitating only for a second. "Morning," he said softly, as though speaking too loud might break something fragile between our houses. I nodded politely. "Good morning. You're Daniel's father, right?" His smile was polite but strained. "We've seen you around a bit. Nice to—" "Dad!" Daniel wasn't due home for hours, yet there he was, jogging up the driveway like a man who'd been chasing fires all morning. He cut between Mr. Ruiz and me like a barricade. "I told you not to bother my father," Daniel snapped. Neighborly politeness drained instantly from Mr. Ruiz's face. His jaw set, his eyes darkened with something that wasn't anger, more like resignation. "I wasn't bothering anyone," he said calmly, "just being neighborly." "Well, don't," Daniel hissed. "We're fine. Leave us alone." Mr. Ruiz looked at me for a long, quiet second. Then he sighed, nodded once, and walked back to his hedges without another word. Daniel rounded on me next. "How many times do I have to say it? Don't talk to them." I stared at my son. Not the boy I raised, not the gentle kid who used to sit under the oak tree reading comic books. This was a man frayed at the edges, terrified of something he refused to name. "Daniel," I said carefully, "what happened with the neighbors?" His eyes twitched. "Nothing," he muttered. "Just stay out of it, please." But fear makes liars clumsy, and Daniel's fear was practically dripping from him. He left again, this time slamming the car door so hard it rattled the siding. When I turned back to the yard, I saw Mrs. Lander watching from her porch again. This time, not with politeness, with pity. And that was when something settled deep in my gut. My son wasn't trying to protect me from the neighbors. He was trying to protect himself from what they might say to me. And I intended to find out exactly what that was. On the third day, the house felt even more unsettled, like it had secrets stuffed into its walls, whispering through the drywall whenever no one was looking. I woke before sunrise, an old habit my body never unlearned, and I tried moving around quietly so I wouldn't disturb Mara or the kids. Still, every floorboard seemed unusually expressive under my feet, creaking long after I stepped away. In the kitchen, the early light made everything look gentler. The ceramic bowl of fruit, the dish towel draped over the sink, the tiny handprints on the stainless steel fridge that Mara had given up trying to wipe away. A home should feel lived in. This one felt worn down. I made tea and watched the steam drift like a thin ghost above the cup. The silence in the house lingered in an uncomfortable way. Not peaceful silence, guarded silence. When I stepped outside onto the porch for fresh air, the world was just waking up. A lawn sprinkler sputtered to life. A jogger passed by with a polite nod. Birds hopped across dew-soaked grass. And there she was again. Mrs. Lander stood by her mailbox, wearing a faded pastel sweater and a look that suggested she'd been waiting for a moment like this. Her posture was careful, tentative, as though she were approaching a wounded animal. She gave me another small nod, the kind that asked, "Are you allowed to speak yet?" This time, I ignored Daniel's warning. I stepped off the porch and approached the edge of the front yard. Not all the way, just enough to show I wasn't afraid of a simple conversation. "Good morning," I said, my voice soft. She hesitated before replying, glancing toward Daniel's house as if he might burst through the walls. "Morning," she said finally. Her voice trembled a little. "I didn't want to bother you. I just wanted to say hello." A simple greeting, something humans have exchanged since the dawn of time, and yet it carried weight here. Before I could reply, her gaze flicked behind me, her body stiffened, the kind of stiffness that warned of something approaching, fast. I turned. Daniel was standing in the doorway, barefoot, wearing yesterday's shirt, hair uncombed, eyes wide with panic. He must have heard me open the door, or maybe he simply wasn't sleeping much these days. "Dad," he said sharply, "I need to talk to you." His voice had that brittle quality, like a piece of wood on the verge of snapping. He glanced at Mrs. Lander, not with anger, but with fear, true, bone-deep fear. She lowered her gaze, murmured something like, "Have a nice day," and hurried back toward her house. Daniel waited until she disappeared behind her front door before he reached for my arm, not harshly, but urgently. "Inside," he whispered. Once the door shut, he turned on me, not violently, but with that same coiled frustration I'd seen building since I arrived. "Dad, why can't you follow one simple rule?" One simple rule? I let the words settle between us. To ignore decent people who've done nothing wrong? "Dad, I'm not going to argue about this. Just don't talk to them. Not even once. Not for anything." "Daniel," I said gently, "what are you afraid they'll tell me?" His jaw clenched so hard I heard his teeth grind. "I'm not afraid," he snapped too quickly. "I'm just protecting our family. Those neighbors, they twist things. They create problems. They don't like us. They never did." That last part struck me. "They don't like you," I repeated slowly. "Why?" He rubbed his forehead, exhaling sharply. "You don't understand. There were issues last year. Drama, false accusations. It's over now. I just don't want it brought up again." "Then tell me what happened." "I don't owe you an explanation," he burst out. The words sounded like they wounded him the moment they left his mouth. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and tried to calm himself. "Dad," he said, softer this time, "please, just stay inside. Relax. Focus on recovering. Don't involve yourself in this neighborhood." Then he walked away, leaving me with more questions than answers. As he disappeared into the hallway, something caught my attention. A sound. Not loud, not frantic. A soft, muffled sob. It came from Mara's direction. I approached the hall quietly and saw her at the kitchen table, her back hunched, her hands covering her face. Her body shook with each breath she tried and failed to steady. She didn't see me. For a moment, I considered going to her, comforting her, asking what was wrong. But something told me that if I approached now, if I pushed too hard too soon, she'd retreat even deeper into whatever darkness she was navigating. So I stepped back and let the moment pass. Later that afternoon, after Daniel left for work and the kids were at school, I wandered outside again, not to stir trouble, but because the walls in that house felt too tight around me. I walked slowly, pretending to admire the hedges near the driveway. That's when it happened. "Sir." It was Mr. Ruiz, standing near his own fence line. He spoke quietly, like he didn't want even the birds to overhear. "Can we talk?" he asked. He looked hesitant, but not hostile, more like a man carrying a burden he'd hoped someone else would finally help lift. I opened my mouth to reply, but footsteps pounded behind me. Daniel again. He must have forgotten something at home, because he was suddenly there, breathless and furious. "What did I tell you?" he shouted. Mr. Ruiz lifted his hands in surrender. "I wasn't causing any trouble. I was just—" "No," Daniel snapped. "You stay away from my family." His voice echoed across the entire street, loud enough that curtains in several homes shifted. Mr. Ruiz's expression hardened with a mixture of frustration and something else. Pity, for me, for my son, for all of us. He walked away slowly, shaking his head. Daniel grabbed my arm, not painfully, but firmly. "You are going to destroy everything," he said through clenched teeth. "Do not speak to them." I looked at him carefully, searching his face for the boy he used to be, the one who once brought me dandelions from the yard and said they were flowers for heroes. But that boy was long gone. All that remained was a man terrified of a truth he was fighting with every breath to keep buried. Later that evening, as I sat alone in the guest room, I replayed the events in my mind. The neighbors' glances, Daniel's fury, Mara's tears. Somewhere between those moments, a pattern emerged. This wasn't about gossip, it wasn't about drama, it wasn't even about dislike. My son was hiding something, something he didn't want me to hear, something the neighbors all knew. And now they were waiting for the right moment to tell me. I just had to be ready when they did. By the fourth day, the house had developed a pulse of its own, nervous, irregular, uneasy. It felt like living inside someone else's heartbeat, one that skipped too often and thudded too hard in all the wrong places. Daniel had left early for work, leaving behind a cold plate of scrambled eggs he barely touched, and a trail of agitation that clung to the air like humidity. Mara moved around the kitchen in quiet motions, her eyes downcast, her smile, when she attempted one, weak and fleeting. I helped the children gather their backpacks. They greeted me with the innocent brightness only children possess, oblivious to the storm brewing between their parents and the neighbors who watched from behind curtains. Once they were gone, Mara disappeared into the bedroom, shutting the door gently. I didn't hear a lock click, but the silence that followed sounded locked all the same. I wandered through the living room as sunlight streamed through the blinds, creating thin stripes across the floorboards. Dust motes floated lazily in those beams, tiny, drifting reminders that time never stops, even when people do. As I walked, a faint sound caught my attention. It wasn't coming from inside the house, it was outside. The distant buzz of a hedge trimmer, a porch door opening, two voices murmuring low. The everyday soundtrack of suburban life. I stepped toward the window and let my eyes sweep across the street. The neighbors were out, some walking dogs, some trimming plants, some exchanging small talk by their driveways. Every single one of them avoided looking at Daniel's house. Except one. A teenage boy on a bicycle slewed as he passed. He glanced at the house, then at me through the window. His eyebrows knitted together with too much understanding for someone so young. He rode on. I tucked that detail away, the way an old man tucks spare nails into a toolbox. Maybe it would be useful later. Maybe not, but it meant something. Children always notice what adults try to bury. Around mid-morning, the house suddenly felt too confining, too tense. I opened the back door and stepped outside. The backyard wasn't large, but it was tidy. Daniel kept the lawn well trimmed, almost obsessively so. A small shed sat against the rear fence, padlocked with a brand new lock that gleamed in the sun. Fresh sawdust gathered around the base, as though someone had recently worked inside. Odd. I'd never seen Daniel do carpentry. I approached, curious, but something, instinct maybe, told me not to test the lock. Not yet. Instead, I walked along the fence, listening to the gentle hum of life from the yards beyond. A dog barked. A woman laughed. A car door shut. Normal sounds. Comforting sounds. Then came a different sound. Whispers. To my left, the fence separating our property from the next-door neighbors stood tall, but it didn't stop sound from drifting through the narrow gaps between the boards. He can't keep this up. Not with his father there. Someone's going to say something. We should have reported it again. The voices were low, tense, laced with worry. I stepped closer, not enough to spy, just enough to listen. But the moment my shoe brushed a dry leaf, the whispering stopped abruptly. Then footsteps retreated. The silence that followed felt like someone holding their breath. I straightened, brushing off my pants, pretending I'd simply been admiring the tomato plants near the fence. But inside, a truth pressed closer, tightening its grip around my ribs. Everyone knew something about my son. Everyone except me. Later, after returning inside, I found Mara sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the muted television. Her shoulders sagged like she carried invisible weight. I sat down gently on the opposite end, giving her space. "You okay?" I asked. She didn't look at me. "Just tired." The same answer as before. "Is Daniel under a lot of pressure lately?" I ventured. She nodded slightly, her eyes unfocusing. "Work, bills, the neighborhood, everything." "What happened with the neighbors?" Her head snapped up, eyes wide, not with anger, but fear. Deep, echoing fear. "Please," she whispered, "don't ask me that. I don't want to make things worse." "Worse in what?" I asked softly. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them back quickly, as though afraid someone, maybe Daniel, would catch her crying. "I promised him I wouldn't talk about it," she said. "We just want to move on." Promises made in fear are chains, not commitments. Before I could respond, she stood. "I need to start lunch." She disappeared into the kitchen, her movements faster than usual, rushed, almost frantic. A few minutes later, a shadow passed by the living room window. I turned. Mrs. Lander stood on her porch again. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, she didn't look away. She mouthed something silently. Just one word. "Sorry." Then she went inside her house. Sorry for what? For Daniel? For the neighbors? For something that happened here before I arrived? The puzzle pieces were scattered, but the picture was beginning to form, a dark one. That night, after dinner, I sat in the guest room reading, trying to quiet my mind. Eventually, I put the book down and rubbed my eyes. That's when I heard it, a rustle, a quiet thump, a muffled sniff, coming from the hallway. I opened the door slowly. Mara stood there, leaning against the wall, her face red and blotched. She wiped her eyes quickly when she saw me. "Sorry," she whispered, "I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," I said softly. "Are you all right?" She shook her head, finally honest. "No, not really." Before I could comfort her, Daniel's voice echoed from the living room. "Mara, where are you?" She flinched, and then she hurried away before I could say another word. When the house finally fell quiet, something occurred to me, something small yet unmistakable. The neighbors stopped whispering when I approached the fence. Mrs. Lander mouthed sorry. The teenagers stared, and Mara was drowning in secrets too heavy for her age. Whatever Daniel was hiding wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't gossip. It wasn't resentment. It was something that had scarred the entire neighborhood. And they all feared the day I learned about it. Little did they know, that day was coming, sooner than Daniel ever imagined. On the 5th day, the truth finally cracked open. It didn't burst out dramatically, like thunder shattering a quiet night. No, secrets like these rarely choose drama. They leak out slowly, like water squeezing through the cracks of an old wooden dam. Quiet at first, then relentless. Daniel had left the house in a rush that morning, nearly forgetting his wallet and snapping at Mara when she reminded him. His agitation was growing by the hour. Each day he seemed less like my son and more like a man cornered by shadows only he could see. Mara barely touched her breakfast. She moved through the house like a ghost, her eyes red, her responses short. If Daniel was the one cracking, Mara was the one crumbling. After she left to take the kids to school and run errands, I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the neighbor-filled street beyond the window. The neighborhood wasn't quiet today. It was watchful. People lingered outside longer than usual. A woman walked her dog, but circled the same block 3 times. 2 men worked on a fence, pausing whenever my house came into view. The teenage boy rode his bike up and down the street, each pass slower than the last. Something was building. I felt it in my bones, the same way an old sailor senses a storm long before the sky darkens. I stepped outside, ignoring Daniel's command, ignoring the sinking weight of dread in my chest. Fresh air filled my lungs, and for a moment I felt like myself again, steady, grounded, not the fragile old man my son seemed to think I'd become. I walked to the front yard, humming a tune from my youth, as though everything were normal. It wasn't, because the moment my feet touched the grass, 3 neighbors looked up from their yards. Not casually, not politely, expectantly. Mr. Ruiz was the first to approach. He put down his rake and walked toward me slowly, wiping sweat from his forehead. His face wore the expression of someone who'd rehearsed what he wanted to say for a long, long time. "Morning, sir," he said gently. "Mind if I join you?" "Not at all," I replied, though my heart began beating slower, heavier, as though bracing itself. He stood beside me in silence for a moment, both of us pretending to admire the street. Then he exhaled. "Listen, about your son," he began, glancing around to make sure no one was listening too closely. "There's something you deserve to know." Before he could continue, a soft voice interrupted us. I should be the one to tell him. I turned. Mrs. Lander, frail, trembling, yet carrying a determination that rooted her feet firmly to the ground, walked toward us. Her steps were small but resolute. Her sweater hung off her thin shoulders like a burden she'd been carrying for far too long. She reached me and took a slow breath, steadying herself. "I didn't know how to start," she said, her eyes filling with a sadness that made my throat tighten. "But you need to hear this. You need to understand why your son doesn't want you speaking to us." Her voice cracked. "Because last summer, your son made a mistake, a big one." My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression calm. She continued, though each word seemed to cost her something. He built something behind his garage, a kind of platform or deck, without permission, without proper supports. A faint memory surfaced, Daniel mentioning he'd taken up woodworking. I'd assumed he was joking. Now I wasn't so sure. One afternoon, she said softly, my grandson was playing with the other kids in the neighborhood. He stepped onto that structure. It collapsed. Mr. Ruiz closed his eyes briefly, confirming the truth of it. Mrs. Lander's voice shook as she went on. He fell through the boards, broke his leg in 2 places, needed surgery, had nerve damage. The poor boy couldn't walk without a brace for months. Her face contorted with remembered grief. Mine froze with shock. I gripped the edge of the porch railing to steady myself. She wasn't done. Your son told everyone it wasn't his fault, she whispered. He said the kids trespassed. He said they shouldn't have been near his property. And the investigators? I asked quietly. Mr. Ruiz's jaw clenched. Daniel told them he never built anything, that it was an old structure he didn't know about. He blamed previous owners. And Mara? I asked. Mrs. Lander lowered her gaze. She backed him up, but we could all tell she didn't want to. The image of Mara crying in the hallway struck me like a blow. But here's the worst part, Mr. Ruiz said. Daniel pressured other neighbors to say the same thing. Some refused, some stayed quiet. But the whole neighborhood saw how aggressive he became, how angry, how threatening. Mrs. Lander took a shuddering breath. The boy's medical bills were enormous. My daughter had to take out loans. Insurance didn't cover everything. Daniel never offered a penny. My throat tightened. And you all kept this quiet? I asked in disbelief. We tried to move on, she whispered. But your son never apologized, never took responsibility. And when we heard you moved in, we worried he'd hide it from you too. I felt my heart thud heavily in my chest, not from fear, but from the crushing weight of understanding. Daniel wasn't afraid of gossip. He wasn't afraid of misunderstandings. He was afraid of the truth finally reaching me. A truth heavy enough to break a neighborhood's trust. A truth painful enough to shatter a boy's future. A truth ugly enough to make any father feel ashamed. The 3 of us stood there in a silence that pulsed with regret and exhaustion. Finally, Mrs. Lander touched my arm gently. I'm sorry you had to hear it like this, she said, but you needed to know. I nodded, though my voice had abandoned me. My son, my own flesh and blood, had lied, harmed, bullied, and hidden. And all the while, he'd treated me like the liability, as if I were the one who couldn't be trusted with the truth, as if aging meant blindness, as if silence were my natural state. But I'd lived too long, seen too much, endured too many storms to let this truth drown quietly. I appreciate you telling me, I finally said. But inside, something else stirred. Not anger, not disappointment, resolve. It was time to confront Daniel, but not yet. Not until I understood everything. Not until I learned the part of the story these neighbors still weren't telling me. Because there was more. I could feel it. And soon, I would uncover every piece of it. When Daniel came home that evening, the house shifted the way a forest does when a predator enters, branches stiffening, wind pausing, every living thing holding its breath. I was sitting at the dining table, pretending to read a newspaper I hadn't turned a page of in 20 minutes. Mara stood at the kitchen counter chopping vegetables with a trembling hand, each slice a little uneven, each breath a little too shallow. The children played in the living room, their chatter muffled beneath the strained silence of their parents' home. The door opened. Daniel stepped in, loosening his tie, sighing heavily, as if the world had wronged him again. He didn't see me at first. He only saw Mara. "You didn't marinate the chicken?" he asked, irritation already sharpening his tone. I'm doing it now," she stammered. "It won't taste right if you rush it." Her knife faltered. I set the newspaper down and cleared my throat deliberately. Daniel's eyes snapped toward me. "Dad," he said stiffly, "didn't expect you to be sitting here." I offered him a polite, neutral smile. The kind a man wears when he already knows what's coming, but allows the other person the dignity of revealing it themselves. "We need to talk," I said. His shoulders tensed instantly. About what?" I let a beat of silence pass. "About the neighbors." For a split second, just one, Daniel's mask cracked. His posture stiffened, his eyes widened, and a ripple of panic flashed across his face before he smothered it like a flame beneath his palm. "What did they say to you?" he demanded. Behind him, Mara froze mid-chop. "Daniel," I said calmly, "I asked you this morning what happened. You wouldn't answer. So I asked the people you told me not to talk to." His face drained of color. "You what?" The children fell silent in the living room. Mara turned, knife still in hand, her face pale. I stood slowly, letting my age show in my movements. Not weakness, but weight that demanded attention. "I know about the construction behind the garage," I said. "I know about the boy who fell. I know about the injuries, the bills, the investigation." Daniel's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "And I know," I continued quietly, "that you lied." The room tightened around us. For a long moment, Daniel didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. Then he erupted. "You don't understand anything!" he shouted. The children flinched. Mara gasped. Even the refrigerator seemed to hum louder, as though trying to drown out the tension. Daniel stepped towards me, his face red, his fists clenched. "They had it out for me from the beginning," he spat. "They blamed me for things I didn't do. They wanted someone to pay for their mistakes. That kid shouldn't have been on my property in the first place." "Daniel," I said softly, "it wasn't fenced, it wasn't marked, and you built something unsafe." He snarled. "I was trying to fix this place up, trying to make this house better. Sorry I don't have the money you think I should." Ah, there it was, the root bleeding out beneath the surface. Mara's eyes flickered toward me, then toward her husband. A quiet, devastating look passed between them, hers pleading, his refusing to see. "You lied to investigators," I reminded him gently. "So what?" he snapped. "People lie every day. I didn't hurt anyone on purpose. Why should I pay for a freak accident?" "You pressured your neighbors to lie," I said. "They owed me," he growled. "They used my tools, my lawn equipment, my help. They didn't complain then." He was unraveling, thread by thread. I breathed deeply, steadying myself. This wasn't about shouting. This wasn't about accusation. It was about truth and the quiet courage to face it. "Daniel," I whispered, "is that why you didn't want me talking to them? Because you were afraid I'd find out?" He slammed his fist onto the table. The children jumped. "Yes," he roared, "because you always judge me. You always think you know better. I didn't need you getting involved and making everything worse." His words were sharp, but they didn't pierce me. Age grants you a curious immunity, a thickened skin for anger and a softened heart for suffering. "What exactly did you think I'd do?" I asked gently. "Tell the truth you refuse to tell?" "They lie," he insisted. "All of them." "No," Mara whispered. Daniel spun toward her. "What did you say?" She shrank, but she didn't take it back. "I said, no." Her voice trembled. "They aren't lying." Daniel's face contorted. "You're taking their side now?" She swallowed. "I was there, Daniel. I saw the boards break. You told me to say I didn't." That's because, Mara, you don't," he sputtered, trapped in half-formed excuses. "You scared me," she whispered. Tears pooled at her eyes. "You said if I didn't back you up, we'd lose everything." The weight of those words settled into the room like ash after a fire. Daniel stared at her, stunned, not by her accusation, but by the fact she'd spoken it aloud. I stepped closer to him. "You put your family in danger with lies," I said quietly, "but you can fix this. It's not too late." His eyes filled, not with remorse, but with something darker. "You don't know anything," he whispered. Then he stormed down the hallway, slamming the bedroom door so hard the frame shook. Mara sank into a chair, covering her face as she cried. I stood there in the center of the room, the echo of Daniel's outburst hanging heavy in the air. The confrontation had changed everything, but it hadn't revealed everything. Because as painful as the accident story was, I sensed something else beneath it, something deeper, something worse. A truth the neighbors hadn't told me yet, a truth Mara hadn't admitted, a truth Daniel was still terrified of. And I knew, with an old man's certainty, that I was only standing on the surface of a story with roots buried far below. It was time to start digging. Not to punish my son, but to save him from the secret that was destroying him from the inside out. The morning after Daniel's eruption felt different, heavier, darker, as if the house itself had finally stopped pretending everything was fine. Secrets can live inside walls for a long time, but once spoken aloud, even in fragments, they stain every corner. Daniel left early again. He didn't look at me. He didn't speak to Mara. He just grabbed his keys, muttered something about being late, and slammed the door behind him. Mara stood in the kitchen afterward, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to keep her ribs from collapsing inward. Her face was puffy, eyes red, movements slow. The children hovered nearby, uncertain, instinctively sensing fault lines in their home, but too young to understand them. Eventually, Mara took the kids to school. The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, the house fell silent. Not peaceful, abandoned. I was alone, and that's when I decided to learn the whole truth. I stepped outside with purpose disguised as leisure, humming as I inspected a patch of wilted grass near the driveway. You learn things over decades of life: how to make yourself invisible, how to be present without being perceived as a threat, how to watch without inviting suspicion. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps. Mr. Ruiz approached again, his face tense, his expression cautious, hopeful maybe, but mostly scared. "I saw him leave," he said quietly. "Is everything all right?" I gave a small sigh. "Not really." He nodded, as though expecting that answer. "He didn't take it well, did he?" "No," I said softly. For a moment, we both stared down the street, where a crow perched on a telephone wire, watching everything. Then I turned to him. "You told me what happened last year," I said, "but that wasn't the whole story." He stiffened. His eyes flicked toward his own house. "I don't want trouble," he murmured. Neither did I. But trouble had already found us. "Mr. Ruiz," I said gently, "I've lived long enough to know when people are hiding pain. And the neighbors here, they're carrying something bigger than a broken deck." He swallowed. A slight breeze rustled the hedges. Somewhere, a car door shut. A dog barked faintly. Normal sounds, but they felt disconnected, like someone had put ordinary life on mute. "What else is there?" I asked. He opened his mouth, closed it, then exhaled slowly. "Not everyone forgave him," he said carefully, "and not everyone healed." "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then leaned in slightly. "Come with me," he said quietly. I followed him across the street, not rushed but steady. A slow walk that felt like descending into memory. He led me to the side of his house, where his garden grew wild and colorful. The air smelled of damp soil and rosemary. A wind chime tinkled softly, bittersweet. And then I saw it. A small ramp, wooden, weathered, built at a gentle incline leading from his patio to his back door. A mobility ramp. My throat tightened. He noticed my expression and nodded sadly. "That's for my nephew," he said, "the boy who fell." I closed my eyes briefly. "How bad is he?" I whispered. "He wears a brace now," Mr. Ruiz said. "Always will. And his nerves, they didn't heal right. Some days he feels everything, some days nothing. A child living between pain and numbness. I felt my chest grow tight. "And my son?" I asked quietly. "Did he ever speak to your family?" Mr. Ruiz shook his head. "Not once." I took that in slowly, letting the truth bruise its way into me. "And that's not all," he added, lowering his voice further. "What the neighbors didn't want to say in front of the others." He hesitated. "Last year, when everything happened, your son didn't just lie about the construction." My stomach dropped. What else did he do? "He threatened people," Mr. Ruiz said quietly. "He said he'd sue anyone who spoke up, said he'd ruin them financially." I stiffened. "Daniel?" Mr. Ruiz nodded. "He yelled at Mrs. Lander on her porch, called her a liar, told her to keep her mouth shut or he'd take her house. She cried for days." My hands curled unconsciously into fists. "And the others?" I asked. "A few neighbors tried to talk to him gently. He screamed at them, told them they were conspiring against him, said they had some agenda." "And Mara?" I murmured. "She looked terrified the whole time," he said. "Not of us, of him." A coldness crept down my spine. "And the boy's medical bills?" I asked. "We managed," he said, but his tight jaw betrayed the struggle. "Family helped, community funds, donations, but no help from your son. Not even an apology." I felt myself sinking slowly under the weight of his words. I had known Daniel was hiding something, but I hadn't imagined this. A year-long trail of fear, anger, intimidation. A neighborhood held hostage by one man's guilt and pride. "That's why," Mr. Ruiz continued softly, "we've all kept our distance. We weren't angry you moved in. We were relieved." "Relieved?" I repeated. "Yes." His gaze met mine. "Because maybe you'd finally do something he never has." My voice cracked as I asked, "And what's that?" "Listen," he whispered, "and care." A sudden noise behind us made us both turn. Mrs. Lander stood on her porch, clutching a dish towel. She hadn't heard our conversation, but she knew something had passed between us. She looked at me with timid hope, and guilt, and sorrow. Then she spoke softly across the yard. "There's more," she said, "about that day." My heart froze mid-beat. Mr. Ruiz's face fell, as if he'd hoped she wouldn't bring it up. I took a shaky breath. "What else happened?" I asked. She clasped the dish towel tighter. "The boy didn't just fall," she whispered. "He screamed for help. But Daniel, he didn't come out right away. The world seemed to tilt." "What do you mean?" "He heard him," she said, voice quivering. "We all did. But your son waited. He wanted time to figure out what to say, what story to tell. And by the time he came out," she shook her head, tears spilling, "the boy was already unconscious." My knees weakened, my breath shortened, my chest tightened around something sharp and sickening. Daniel hadn't just made a mistake. He had chosen self-preservation over a child's suffering. I turned away, gripping the railing of the Ruiz patio, trying to keep myself upright. Behind me, both neighbors waited quietly, respectfully, painfully. It took me a long time to speak again. When I finally did, my voice was steady, too steady. "Thank you," I said, "both of you." They nodded, but neither of us pretended the words were enough. Because now, I understood. This wasn't about a collapsed structure. It wasn't about money. It wasn't even about lies. It was about character, my son's. And as I walked back to Daniel's house, slowly, deliberately, each step heavy with revelation, I knew something that chilled me to my core. This wasn't just Daniel's secret. It had become mine too. And whether I liked it or not, I was going to have to decide what to do with it. Not tomorrow, not next week, soon. Because secrets rot families from the inside out. And this one had already begun to hollow my son. When I returned to Daniel's house, the walls seemed to close in tighter than before. It felt smaller, or maybe I had simply grown too large for the lies living inside it. The quiet pressed against me like heavy fog, thick with everything I now knew. I moved through the living room, touching the furniture lightly as I passed, grounding myself with each step. I didn't sit, I didn't rest. I paced, slow, steady, the way a man walks before delivering news that shatters illusions. When Mara finally returned with the children, she froze the moment she saw my face. Mothers recognize tension the way sailors smell storms. "Is everything all right?" she asked softly. A safe question, a hopeful one. "Not yet," I said. Her eyes darted to the kids. She ushered them upstairs, whispering something about snacks and homework. Only when their footsteps faded did she turn back to me, wringing her hands nervously. "What did the neighbors tell you?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I asked, "How long have you been living with this?" Her face crumpled. "A year," she whispered. "A whole year." Then she sank into a kitchen chair and buried her face in her hands. I sat across from her, giving her the time she needed to gather herself. Finally, she lifted her head, eyes swollen. "I didn't want to lie," she said. "I swear to you, I tried to convince him to tell the truth, but Daniel kept saying it would ruin us, that we'd be sued, that we'd lose everything." "But a child," I murmured. "A child was hurt." She nodded miserably. "I know." "And Daniel waited before helping." Another nod, this one slow and shameful. "I begged him to run outside," she whispered. "I heard the board snap. I heard the boy crying. But Daniel grabbed my arm and said, 'Think before you go out there.'" Her lip trembled. "I told him we needed to help, but he said we needed to control the story first." The words felt like acid sliding down my spine. "Mara," I said quietly, "why didn't you tell anyone?" "I was scared," she admitted. He wasn't like this before, but after the accident, he changed. He got paranoid, angry. He said everyone was out to get him. He accused me of siding with the neighbors. She stopped herself. I waited. She swallowed. "He scared me," she whispered. Those 3 words shook something old and fatherly inside me, something protective that had slept for years. Before I could respond, the front door swung open. Daniel stepped inside, his hair disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his expression exhausted and wired at the same time, as if he'd been running from a truth he could no longer outrun. He saw us at the table. "What?" he said flatly. "Mara and I were talking," I replied calmly. "Oh, great," he snapped. "So now you're getting her involved in your crusade?" I studied him carefully. He wasn't just angry. He was unraveling. "Daniel," I said, "sit down. We need to." "No," he barked. "No more lectures. No more judging. I told you to stay out of this." "You told me to stay away from the neighbors," I corrected gently. "But you forgot that neighbors aren't the ones living with guilt." He flinched, as if struck. I kept going, slow and steady. "I know everything now, son." His breath hitched. "No," he whispered. "You only know what they said." "And what did they say that wasn't true?" I asked. He stared at me, trapped, cornered, silent. His jaw twitched, his fingers curled, his breath grew uneven. And then, the doorbell rang. Daniel froze. Mara froze. Even I stiffened as a cold ripple slid through the house. The bell rang again, sharper this time. Daniel's voice came out small. "Don't answer it." Mara looked terrified. "Daniel, don't answer it," he snapped. But I was already standing. I walked to the door with the slow determination of a man who had lived through wars, quiet ones and loud ones, ones in the world and ones at home. I opened it, and standing on the porch was a city inspector, clipboard in hand, official jacket, calm, unreadable expression. "Good afternoon," he said. "We received a follow-up report about potential safety violations from last year's incident. I need to speak with the homeowner." Behind me, Daniel's breath shattered. You filed something?" he stammered. The inspector frowned. "No, sir. It was an anonymous submission, but it included enough detail to reopen the case." I felt Mara grip the back of my shirt, trembling. Daniel stepped forward, pale, eyes wild. "You can't just show up," he shouted. "You need an appointment." "Not for a follow-up investigation," the inspector replied calmly. Daniel's eyes snapped toward me. "You did this," he spat. I shook my head. No, I didn't. The truth struck him with visible force. His gaze swung toward the street. 3 neighbors stood outside, not talking, not approaching, just watching. Watching him, watching us, watching the truth arrive at the doorstep like a reckoning. Daniel's mouth opened, perhaps to curse, perhaps to plead, but the inspector spoke first. "Sir, I'll need to inspect the garage and the yard now." Daniel turned ghost-white. He looked at me in a way no son should ever look at a father, with betrayal, fear, and a desperation that broke something inside me. "You couldn't leave it alone," he whispered hoarsely. "You just had to talk to them." "No, Daniel," I said softly. "They talked to me." And that was when he snapped. He lunged toward me, not violently, but frantically, grabbing my shirt with trembling hands. "You're going to ruin my life!" His voice cracked, high and broken. "I'm helping you face the truth," I said. "You're destroying everything!" Mara sobbed behind him. The inspector watched grimly. The neighbors stood in silent, heavy judgment. And Daniel fell apart right there in front of all of us. He crumpled to his knees, head bowed, hands clutching his hair. A grown man reduced to pieces by the truth he'd spent a year outrunning. I knelt beside him, slowly, painfully. "Son," I whispered, placing a hand on his shoulder. "The truth was coming, whether you wanted it to or not. But it doesn't have to end your life." He shook his head violently. "You don't understand. You don't know the rest." I frowned. "The rest?" He looked up at me with hollow, haunted eyes. "There's something I never told anyone," he whispered. A cold current ran through my veins. "What is it, Daniel?" I murmured. He swallowed hard. "The accident wasn't the worst part," he said. "It's what I did afterward." My blood chilled. "There's something the neighbors don't know," he said. He lifted his tear-streaked face. Something in his eyes was darker than fear, darker than guilt. Something that made the inspector straighten, and the neighbor stiffen, and Mara clasp her hands over her mouth. And I realized this story had another secret buried beneath the one I'd uncovered. Something worse, something Daniel had never told anyone. Not until now. Daniel didn't look like a man with a secret. He looked like a man consumed by one. He knelt on the living room floor, shoulders shaking, fingers tangled in his hair. His breath came in short, sharp exhales, each one thinner than the last. He seemed smaller somehow, diminished, like guilt had hollowed out whatever strength he once carried. The inspector stood near the door, awkward but alert. Mara sat on the couch, trembling and covering her mouth. The neighbors lingered outside, watching through the open doorway with hesitant concern. I knelt beside my son, my knees protesting the motion, but pain no longer mattered. "Daniel," I said softly, "whatever it is, say it." He shook his head violently, as if shaking loose the word itself. "No," he whispered, "no, because once I say it, it's real." "It's already real," I murmured. He let out a sound, a broken animal sound, and finally lifted his face. "I didn't just lie," he said hoarsely. "I didn't just delay helping the boy." His eyes flooded. "I hid something." My heartbeat faltered. "What?" He wiped his face with a trembling hand. "When the platform collapsed, when the boy fell, he dropped something." "Dropped something? What do you mean?" I asked. Daniel swallowed, his throat trembling as if the truth were scraping its way upward like shards of glass. "He was holding a small camera," Daniel choked out, "one of those cheap kids' video cameras. He'd been recording himself climbing up to the platform." My stomach twisted. "He recorded the fall," Daniel whispered. The room went silent, so silent I could hear the hum of the refrigerator and my own pulse thumping in my ears. "And when I finally ran outside," he continued, "I saw it on the ground. The red light was still blinking. I panicked." Mara gasped. "Daniel," she whispered. His hands began to shake uncontrollably. "I picked up the camera," he said. "I hid it. I didn't want anyone to see it, because if they did, they'd know the truth." I stared at him, stunned. "Where is it now?" His lips trembled. "I destroyed it." The words fell heavy and sickening, like stones dropping into dark water. "You what?" Mara cried. "I smashed it," Daniel said, voice breaking. "I smashed it behind the garage, then buried the pieces." The inspector stiffened. "You tampered with evidence," he said. Not accusing, just acknowledging the gravity. Daniel let out another shuddering breath. "That's why I didn't help right away," he whispered. "Not because I didn't care, but because I saw the camera, and all I could think was, I need to get to it before anyone else does." His face collapsed into his hands again. "And by the time I found it, the boy had already lost consciousness. And I didn't try to resuscitate him. I didn't check his breathing. I didn't do anything until I hid that camera." A crushing silence fell over the room. Mara's sobs turned her whole body into a tremble. The inspector looked at Daniel with solemn, pained judgment, but not cruelty. And me? For a moment, I couldn't move. This was not the son I had raised. This was a scared child trapped in a man's body, one who made a terrible mistake and then buried it under worse choices. "Daniel," I said quietly, "why didn't you tell me this before?" He looked at me with hollow, haunted eyes. "Because you would have told the truth." I closed my eyes briefly. That was the deepest wound of all. He didn't trust his father because he knew I would never protect a lie. When I opened my eyes, the inspector stepped forward. "I will need to include this in my report," he said. "All of it. I'm sorry." Daniel nodded weakly, as though he expected nothing less. I took a slow breath, steadying myself as only an old man with years of storms behind him can. "Is that everything?" I asked. Daniel hesitated. "No," he whispered. "There's something else." My heart tightened again. "What else?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain calm. He clenched his fists. "The neighbors think I bought new tools because mine broke during the accident," he said. "That's not true." I frowned. "They were gifts," he said quietly. "From them. They gave me those tools because they trusted me, because I promised to help fix things around here. They gave me their tools." His jaw trembled. "And after the accident, I kept them, all of them, even the expensive ones. When they asked for them back, I told them they must have misplaced them." Mara covered her mouth. The inspector exhaled sharply. "And when the neighbors pushed," Daniel whispered, voice cracking, "I threatened to tell the police they'd trespassed on my property. I used their fear against them." He collapsed into sobs then, loud, broken, desperate. And I felt something inside me crumble. Not anger, not disappointment, not even shame, but sorrow. Deep, cavernous sorrow for a man who'd been drowning alone in guilt, fear, and pride, so heavy it twisted him into someone unrecognizable. I placed a hand on his back and let him cry. The inspector stepped outside to give us a moment. Mara wiped her face and knelt beside him, placing her hand on his arm. For the first time since I'd arrived at Daniel's home, the house no longer felt quiet. It felt honest, painfully, brutally honest. And in that honesty, something changed. Daniel's sobs softened, his breathing steadied, his hands unclenched. He looked at me again, not with panic, not with anger, but with surrender. "I don't know what to do," he whispered. "I don't know how to fix this." I squeezed his shoulder gently. "Truth," I said softly, "is the only tool that can repair what lies have broken." He closed his eyes, nodding slowly, like a child finally accepting medicine he's avoided for too long. Then he whispered, "Dad, will you help me?" My chest tightened. For the first time in a year, he wasn't hiding. He wasn't running. He wasn't blaming. He was asking. "Yes," I said quietly, "but only if you promise something." He looked up. "Promise you'll stop hiding," I said. "From the neighbors, from your wife, from yourself." His eyes filled again, but this time not with terror, with relief. He nodded. "I promise." A fragile peace settled between us, but as I looked at him, broken, exhausted, ready to face consequences, I realized something important. The neighbors didn't know about the camera. They didn't know about the destroyed evidence. They didn't know about the tools. They didn't know about Daniel's delayed response. Only I did. And what I did with that truth would shape everything that followed. Tomorrow, the inspector would return, and decisions would have to be made. But tonight? Tonight, I would reveal something to Daniel he never saw coming. A truth of my own. One I'd kept quiet for far longer than he had kept his. That night, after the inspector left and the neighbors slowly retreated into their homes, an uneasy stillness lingered in Daniel's house. Not the tense, suffocating quiet of secrets, but the raw, trembling quiet that follows confession. The air was heavy, but lighter than before. Still painful, still bruised, but honest. Mara settled the children upstairs, her voice soft and cracked from hours of crying. Daniel sat at the dining table with his head bowed, fingers tracing the wood grain like he was memorizing every curve and knot. He looked smaller, not physically, but the arrogance, the defensiveness, the stubborn pride, all of it had drained from him, leaving behind a man stripped to his core. He was scared, ashamed, human, and maybe, for the first time in years, reachable. I sat across from him, hands folded on the table. He didn't look up until the chair creaked under my weight. "Dad," he whispered, "what happens now?" The question trembled in the air between us, fragile and cold. "Now," I said gently, "you start telling the truth. To the inspector, to the neighbors, to your wife, and to yourself." He nodded slowly. "I'm ready." He meant it. I could feel it. But he wasn't ready for what I had to say next. "Daniel," I murmured, "there's something you don't know." He lifted his head, confusion knitting his eyebrows. "What do you mean?" I exhaled, steadying myself. "You remember the boy who got hurt?" He swallowed. "Yes." "I met his family," I said quietly. His eyes widened. "When?" "The day before I moved in." Daniel's breath hitched. "They didn't hate you," I continued. "They weren't looking to ruin your life. They weren't waiting in the shadows to strike." He blinked rapidly, studying my face, searching for the trap. "They just wanted honesty," I said. "They wanted to hear you admit what happened. They wanted you to apologize. They wanted to move on." He shook his head slowly. "No, Dad, the neighbors hated me. They filed complaints. I raised a hand gently. "They filed those complaints because they were afraid," I said, not angry. A long silence stretched between us. Then I said the part he least expected. "And as for the medical bills, those are taken care of." Daniel's face twisted in confusion. "What? How? By who?" I met his gaze steadily. "By me." His breath caught mid-inhale. "I paid them," I said. "Every one of them, months ago." He stared at me, stunned, his mouth opening, closing, reopening, like a man trying to speak underwater. "But why?" he whispered. "Why would you do that? Dad, I never told you about the bills." "No," I said softly, "you didn't." His eyes filled. "Then how?" "They reached out," I said. "Your neighbor, Mrs. Lander's daughter, told me what happened. She wasn't asking for anything. She just wanted me to know. She thought you were overwhelmed. She thought maybe, just maybe, someone should check on you. I paused, letting the truth land. They didn't want revenge, Daniel. They wanted healing. He stared at me as if the world were rearranging himself beneath him. And when I asked about the boy's care, I continued, they told me they were drowning in bills. So I told them I'd take care of it. Daniel shook his head in disbelief. But you don't have that kind of money. Dad, you said after retirement you were living carefully. I smiled faintly. You forget who raised you. He blinked. I haven't lived extravagantly in my life, I said. I saved. I invested. Quietly. His confusion deepened. Daniel, I added softly, I'm not poor. I never was. I just never flaunted what I had. Silence. Then, why didn't you tell me? He whispered. Because, I said, leaning back, money wouldn't have fixed the real problem. He swallowed hard. And what's that? I held his gaze with the steady patience only an old man can wield. Your fear, I said. Your pride. The belief that asking for help makes you weak. His eyes glistened. Son, I said gently, you weren't ruined by the accident. You were ruined by the shame you refused to face. His shoulders shook. I thought if I hid it long enough, it would go away, he whispered. Secrets never go away, I replied. They grow teeth. The house was silent, except for the small, broken sounds of a man unlearning the lies that had shaped him. Then something unexpected happened. Daniel reached across the table and took my hand. His grip was firm at first, then loosened, like he was afraid I'd pull away. I'm sorry, he croaked, for yelling at you, for blaming you, for all of it. I squeezed his hand. I know, I said simply. He lowered his gaze. What do I do now? You tell the inspector the truth, I said. Every part of it. You apologize to the neighbors. You return the tools you kept. And tomorrow, we go to see the boy and his family together. His breath hitched. I don't know if I can face them. You can, I said, because I'll be with you. His chin trembled. He nodded. We sat together for a long time, father and son, two flawed men, bound by blood, forgiveness, and the slow, painful journey back to integrity. Eventually, I stood and walked toward the front door. Daniel followed. The night outside was cool, quiet, honest. Neighbors lingered, in shadows, on porches, behind windows, watching, waiting. I stepped onto the porch and looked around the street. The words I spoke were meant for Daniel, but loud enough for the neighborhood to hear. They told me the truth, I said. And now it's our turn. Daniel exhaled shakily beside me. We stood there together. No lies, no excuses, no running. Just a father helping his son face the world he'd tried so hard to hide from. For the first time, I felt the house breathe easy, and the neighborhood followed.